I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Good morning, everyone. First on the agenda, we have the approval of the minutes. Do I hear a motion for approval?
So moved.
Second, okay. Moved by Commissioner Kemp, seconded by Mr. McLean. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any nays? Okay, the ayes carry. Next, we have public comment on agenda items, 3 minutes per speaker. Has anyone signed up to speak? No? Okay. Would anyone from the audience care to speak at this time? Anyone? Okay. With that, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is a presentation. And I see Mr. Seward approaching the lectern. Good morning.
Good morning. Jeff Seward, Chief Financial Officer for HART. During the budget adoption process in September, we had mentioned a potential CIP project, as well as one of our legislative asks for our heavy maintenance facility building out of 21st Avenue. And we promised that we would come back with a presentation to the committee on exactly what our plans were and why that decision was made. So I will turn it over to our project manager for the HM facility building, Linda Crescentini. She is also the acting PMO director while Mr. Campello is out. So, Linda?
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Crescentini.
Good morning. Linda Crescentini, project manager. And I'm going to give you a quick update on the design build for the heavy maintenance facility at our 21st Avenue campus. Okay. So we're going to go through existing conditions, our original plan, and then a comparison of a renovation versus new construction, some of the funding opportunities we have, the funding breakdown, timeline, and then our next steps that are needed. So with that, when we refer to the HM building, we're referring to the heavy maintenance facility. There's a couple of facilities out at the 21st Avenue campus. There's the heavy maintenance facility, which is exactly what it says for heavy maintenance. We have preventive maintenance, which is for our oil changes, tire repairs, things like that. We have the admin building, and we have the procurement annex. So we're going to focus specifically on the heavy maintenance building, but it does tie into the other facilities. So it was built back in 1981 as a trucking facility. It was not built to support transit maintenance facility. It's been modified over the years on an as-needed basis without the benefit of an overall master plan. The facility is old. It's reached its useful life and is in need of very significant repairs. Couple of the repairs I'm going to go through. I'm just going to highlight a few of them. They're extensive, but I'm going to highlight the major ones. The entire roof is in need of repair. It leaks. We did get approval to move ahead with the HM roof replacement as well as the PM in a previous board meeting. However, we chose not to move ahead with the HM building because of some of the items I'm going to show you here. The cost to upgrade the building is more than the cost of a new building. So over the next few slides, I'll demonstrate that the $6 million of renovation may get us another 6 to 8 years of useful life, whereas a new building would get us 40 years plus. The current building is not energy efficient. It's not ADA compliant. It does not meet Florida Structural Building Code requirements. It does not meet current wind load requirements, and that's extremely important. And we do have some safety inefficiencies, such as fall protection.
Linda, may I just
sure,
interrupt for
absolutely.
I just want to point out, just for the record, so folks know, and most may know, but the ADA was passed by Congress in 1990, so this building
Correct.
predates, so it's not like we're...
Absolutely. Right. And so what happens with that comment is once you modify 50% of a building or you spend 50% of the building's costs, you have to upgrade the entire building. And we'll get into that on a couple of the other slides. So I just picked a couple of slides. I'm going to point out some items here, some things you can see, some things you can't. So the workspace is very narrow. It's very difficult for the mechanics that are out there to have room to move around the vehicles. Extremely narrow walkways. We have poor lighting. We have poor air circulation. The structural steel, if you can look in the slide farthest to the left, is various heights out there. So with the CNG, the tanks are on top of the vehicle. So in some bays, you're able to lift the buses, and some you can't. So it's very difficult for maintenance. They have to know specifically what bus is going into what bay, and not all buses fit in each bay for different items that need to be done. Some of the things that you cannot see that I'm going to go through is the building does have lead paint in it. The HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, chillers are past their useful life. The switchgear was last refurbished in 1984. We're down to like I said, there's several buildings out there. We're down to the last few fiber strands that connect the HM building with the admin building with the PM. So all of new IT fiber needs to be run. And one of the safety items we don't see in the picture, but the current fire safety system is obsolete. So the replacement parts are no longer available. One of the things that we do is we buy refurbished parts, which are no longer, we can't even find the refurbished parts. They're dwindling down to almost nothing. So some others, we don't have ballers to protect the doors. The electrical junction boxes need to all be sealed. We need a better separation between the administrative area and the maintenance area. When we sat down with the city of Tampa for code compliance, it's very important to draw a line between where offices are and where the bays are. The roof, like I mentioned, needs to be replaced, needs to have better ventilation and facilitate a more airflow throughout there. We have preliminary meeting with the city, but it all depends on where we go from here. The worst thing that it is, and there's a couple of things I want to show you in this slide. One is if you look at where the person standing close to us is, and you look at the person standing close to the building is to the left, there's a huge drop-off. The existing building sits in a fishbowl. So needless to say, on the right, you see all of the flooding.
This is a fishbowl.
Yeah, pretty much. So this isn't an everyday occurrence, but it's a very common occurrence. It's not uncommon for us to have water in the building. It's not uncommon for us to have water in the maintenance bays. And if you look at the other thing I want to point out, because I'll talk about it later, is if you look where the PM building, that's the preventive maintenance building, towards the back of the slide to the right, you can see where the vehicles are much higher and they're not in the flooding. So we're going to discuss that in a minute. The original plan was we requested.
Excuse me, Linda.
I'm sorry.
The flooding picture. Do we know how old that photo is?
That is several years old. That goes back. And that I'm glad you brought that up.
Just wanted to stress that it's not like a new thing. It's something that staff has been dealing with for years.
Actually, this picture is probably 3 or 4 or 5 years old. And one thing I want to mention about that before we get too much further, I'm glad you stopped me. We've teamed up with the city of Tampa with their 43rd Street outfall project. We teamed up with DOT for the I-4, and now we understand we need to reach out to CSX. We do have some existing problems on our campus. We do have collapsed pipe because of the weight of the buses over the years. The city, we went into a kind of a joint venture with the city and Swift Mud to identify some funding for the city. The city was able to secure a pond site, which has helped alleviate a little bit of this. The 43rd Street outfall, I understand, is almost finished in design. They've hired EPN Group. They expect to have design finished by December, January, and they hope to go out in the street in February, March. And that construction will put a new pipe from close to our location down 43rd all the way down to McKay Bay. And that should help a little, too. It doesn't fix the problem, but it helps a little.
Excuse me. Thank you for the clarification, because having been here when we were going through some of the off-site coordination, this provides a clear picture that, yes, there's some on-site, multi-agency coordination that was required, but there's still the on-site that cannot alleviate.
Absolutely. Okay. And what I've heard over the years is that when DOT expanded I-4 and they added the 2 lanes in either direction on I-4, we started seeing our condition worsen. We met with DOT a couple of weeks ago again. They had task assignment assigned to Icon Consulting, and they're putting a report together. What it shows is the pinch point is not I-4. The pipe is actually oversized at I-4. I-4, of course, they designed to Ultimate, which is another 2 lanes in each direction, so their pipe is large. CSX, it goes down to nothing. So along the flow of ours, to get ours off-site, we take all the water onto our site from the housing development from the north. So once that backs up and backs everything up, the water seems to stagnate on our property. So next thing we're going to do is, once DOT finalizes their report, we're going to have a meeting with them. Then we're going to all bring in CSX, the city, DOT, us, and see if we can get some kind of improvement on CSX's property. So,
yes, excuse me,
absolutely.
This may be something you're going to cover about the new project, but I understand the proposed new facility would be on the same property.
Correct.
Does the new plan include dealing with the elevation changes in terms of bringing in more fill and so forth? And I assume the new plan would also then have a whole new on-site stormwater system.
Absolutely. So remember in the picture I told you to pay attention where the elevation changes? We want to put the building close to the PM building, which would take us out of that fishbowl. The existing building would stay in current operation until the new building was built, and then we would move everything over. We cannot fill, like you mentioned, the meetings that we had with the city of Tampa. We cannot make the situation worse to our neighbors to the south. So if we were to try to salvage the building where it is, we would have to look at underground vaults, which are extremely expensive, to retain the water on our property, because we don't have excess property to put new pond sites on. So it's kind of catch-22, but if we relocate the building, we still have the issue of flooding and parking the vehicles, so we would still have to address that. So yes, we hired land and water engineering services. They're our engineer of record. They've established the defects that we have as far as the stormwater system. We need to wait until the new footprint of the HM building is established, because we don't want to fix something that's going to be obsolete anyhow. So once that's done, we're going to fix everything that's on our site, and then in combination with everybody else, we're going to try to get the off-site stuff better.
Okay.
But pardon the thank you, Mr. McKay. Pardon the obvious question, but given that there is a recurring pond on our site, is there any wisdom to, or I just have to ask the question: is there room to put a pond on our site, or has that been looked at? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Kind of fighting what happens.
Yeah, we don't have room for a pond site right today. Okay. However, we do have that easement that brings all that water and collects right to the south of us that backs up. We actually have an option that we would need to. Well, we did talk to the city. We put a lot of options on the table with the city, but if they were to divert that and go farther west on 21st and then south instead of coming through our property, it would be huge if they tied in, because then all of the water from the housing development to the north of us would not collect on our property. So depending on what we can work out with the city, we may have some other options. Okay. But we're only going to spend money on what we can fix on our property.
Okay.
So, the PM building is the high building that's towards the back where the vehicles are parked, and you can see the elevation difference out there. That's where we would like. You can't really see it from here, but it's on the west side of the PM building on the higher ground. Okay, so our original plan was to do, we did a request like $7 million. We were cut back to 4.7. State a good repair grant, and that was specifically to renovate the existing building. So we moved ahead with 30% conceptual to say what would it take to rehab this existing building and where are we. We advertised the design build, and as part of that, we teamed up with Bandus Construction in Wendell. Bandus is the contractor. They built the Mercedes building on Dale Maybury. They're building the Audit building up in Wesley Chapel. They've been around for a very long time, and they're a very solid contractor. They teamed up with Wendell, who is out of state. However, they're specific to transit. They have built 20 different transit facilities, won some awards across the country. So we're so happy to have someone that's up to date on FTA requirements, somebody that's up to date on innovation in transit facilities. So we're happy for that. Okay, so besides the design issues, besides the current conditions, this is the type of money that we would be spending to renovate versus new construction. We would have to keep current operations in progress. We can't abandon the building. In order to do that, we'd have to bring on a bunch of trailers. We'd have to get IT support to wire all those trailers for our maintenance folks to continue current operations. The cost of the trailers, to maintain the trailers, and to move people in and out constantly would be almost $250,000. There's no value to this once construction is complete. It basically doesn't help us with anything inside the building. So with limited resources and spending that, we're behind before we even get started. So you take the $300,000 plus you take the $1.5 million that we need for the roof. You're at $2 million that we really don't even see a physical difference yet. So not only is it going to hurt HART, it hurts current operations, it hurts the contractor in their staging. They would have to, in order to keep us live in the building, they would have to mobilize and demobilize 5 different times. So they'd have to get electricians on site to do phase 1, how we can give them 2 bays at a time. Electrician on site, mechanical on site, send them away, open up phase 1, bring everybody back for phase 2. So production would be slowed down, and the contractor would obviously suffer in production. And the last point on here is Irma taught us to be compliant. We are the evacuation for Hillsborough County, and if our current building isn't we didn't get hit, so obviously we didn't sustain the winds that everybody else did, but that's the that's the heartbeat of the agency, and we have issues with knowing that we're investing money into a building that's non-compliant.
Thank you, Missy.
And just to reiterate, had we been hit by somewhere between a 2 to 3 storm, we wouldn't have been evacuating because we would have had no garage. Mm-hmm. So we're very lucky now, and it's a lot of shoestrings and duct tape, and actually wonderful effort by the maintenance team that's there, but we can't. There are a lot of reasons why we would like to replace as opposed to renovate, and one is there's no fixing it to make it good enough to go through a hurricane. And I know Linda will get to this. We have a major concern that once we open up for repairs, we're exposing our folks to asbestos and lead paint. There's no excuse for us doing that, and there's no way to renovate in place without our people being exposed.
Absolutely. So, new construction. So this is a rendering of the facility. It would be a little smaller footprint. It'd definitely be on higher ground, so we wouldn't have the flooding problem. But we think if it's more efficient, we can absolutely live with smaller space. So this is the way that we could, hold on. This is a way that we could build a new building while maintaining our folks in the existing building while construction is going on. Still at the 21st Avenue campus, we would, for obvious reasons, leave the fueling intact always, even after this is complete, because we have the fueling lane, we have the big, huge diesel tanks, the 20,000-gallon diesel tanks that are out there, we have the CNG facility. So fueling and cash collection, all of that would remain exactly where it is. Everything else would move into the new building. We would have lower costs and efficiencies as far as conserving water, waste, electric, better management of inventory with fuel dispensing systems. It would be fully functional as well as ADA compliant and incorporating sustainable designs. The initial plan would also account for looking into the future as far as alternative vehicles and what we would need to maintain those. That would all be part of the master plan. And then, like I said, the CNG and the fueling would stay exactly where it is. So let's talk a little bit about funding. Back in August, we put in a grant application for bus facility infrastructure investment program for $10 million. We haven't heard back yet, but probably going to be hearing in the next couple of weeks. So it's just a matter of timing to hear back if we're successful. We put in $10 million. We did not over ask and we did not under ask. It was based on the recommendations of Wendell as far as how much money was available and what we needed. So the funding breakdown. We're looking at a $20 million project that would help us with the stormwater, that would help us with the entire project, with a new master plan, with a circulation study. Currently, we have $3.9 million left on the existing state of good repairs. We did spend some money for methane detection system to be CNG compliant. And we also have the $1.2 million budgeted for the roof replacement, which we did not go ahead and use. So we have $5.1 million funded. We have $14.9 million need, of which $10 million is a possibility if we're successful in the grant, which would leave us to a little over $4 million to be determined. Timeline. We're currently working through the NEPA process because we are looking at new rather than rehab renovate. We're complete with the application. Our folks have been in discussions with FTA, and we're moving it along through the system. We hope to get a final categorical exclusion in March. We feel pretty comfortable and confident with that. Our design would be about 10 months, which would put us back into January of next year. 22 months construction schedule, and then we would move to the demo of the old building. So, next steps. We need to confirm the funding sources. We need to confirm the funding sources and complete the NEPA process. The pre-design requirements that we're working on now is we need additional survey and geotech for where we hope the new building would go, and the circulation study. The grant was specific to rehab renovate, and our folks have been in touch with FTA to see what it would take to move that grant funding to new construction versus rehab renovate. And we would finalize the design build contract. So with that said, our maintenance folks do a lot with very little. They're not asking for a lot, so we need to give them a safe, efficient building to work in, and we appreciate your support.
Thank you, Ms. Crisantine. Appreciate it. Good presentation. Any questions? Mr. McLean?
Linda, good briefing. Thank you. In the beginning, you mentioned it would take $6 million to renovate the entire facility. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was before I got here. That was the original ask that they put in. Once we identified all the issues and realized exactly where we are, I think that was under what we should have asked for.
It sounds like it was. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, it absolutely. I don't think they understood all of the code compliance, and things have changed since, but as far as one thing I didn't mention, the efficiencies for the office spaces right now, they're kind of scattered. For us to do that and to get all those folks into an area where they could all interact with each other, we would have to put an elevator. One of the mandates for ADA compliance is to put an elevator in that old building just to have ADA compliance to move between the first floor and the second floor. So there's a lot of things that we would have to do that isn't really necessarily helping our maintenance folks.
Okay. And to be clear, Mr. Vice Chair, a lot of this was noted in the conversation we had after we had made the award. The selection for the renovation was, here's a price tag for renovation, but given the age and condition of the facility, there's no way to know exactly what they would get into, but they anticipated that they would find a lot more that had to be mitigated. So that is a good catch. Even though $6 million was the first price tag, the vendors, even at that time, were saying to expect it to be significantly higher, if not doubled.
They feel they can, with that money, they can't make improvements, but they can get us code compliant, which would be horrible for our folks.
Okay.
I mean, not to say code compliance is horrible. Code compliance is good.
Also, for the total cost, you estimate $20 million for
Correct.
total. Does that include the demolition piece also?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now,
the demolition of the existing building, we would only demo where the maintenance bays are because we need it for parking. But the fueling lane and the cash room and those items on the northern side of the building would stay.
So we would keep a portion of that building?
We would keep a very, very small portion because we can't move fueling. It would be very expensive right now to move our fueling.
I have a quick follow-up to that point after.
And are these in 2017 dollars or 2016 dollars?
They're in current dollars.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kemp?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great presentation.
Thank you.
I'll go back to what my usual issues are with others. It looks great, the new building, but it was missing solar panels.
And we have all options on the table. Yes, we do. They are a sustainable designer, so they are looking at solar, whether it's in the parking lot or whether it's on the buildings. They're looking at the ability to take care of any type of vehicle, whether it's the articulating vehicles or electric vehicles. Everything is being reviewed, and we want to be looking forward to what's in the future, but they absolutely are into sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Because when I look not only on the building, as I've said before, saving taxpayer dollars, getting us operational dollars, would be also the future of what I see will be all vehicles. Again, thinking, and it sounds like with the not moving the fueling is a good idea. Because I do want to make it electric bus, have that into our considerations, and so I do believe that we will have an electric bus future, and we'll be thinking about how we deal with those vehicles, and also it seems like there'll be more variable size vehicles in the future from what.
And they are absolutely designing to that. That's one thing, and we even heard Orlando in a training 2 weeks ago. Where they cannot bring the articulating buses into their bays. And so, but that was specific because Wendell has nationwide experience. That was one of the things they mentioned. Going back to your solar panels, we did look at, even though I said this is specific to HM, we're also evaluating PM building. We put a new roof on there. We have a 20-year warranty. But as an open space, can we also put panels up there too?
I also think we need to, and I don't know where this is, I think it's priority-wise. I think it came by me on the MPO list, but I'd like to see it on TBARDA, on the TMA, the different MPOs as a priority. They do have the BRT in St. Petersburg on that list, and to me this would be actually a lot lesser ask. I'm just wondering, too, about in terms of where is this sitting, and this might not be a question for you, but in terms of the state funding and.
We are currently on the MPO project list. It's an out year, but we are on that list, so we are able to go, since we're in the work plan, go to Tallahassee and request money. And in fact, Jeff and I are going to Tallahassee on Wednesday. It is a 9 a.m. flight. I have to do my 4-year-old's birthday party that morning, sorry. But we will be in Tallahassee, and our major request this year for the work plan from DOT is going to be funding for this project. We will continue to stress, in the context of hurricane hardening, which is very popular, of a conversation this year, not just that we need a new building, but we won't make it through a hurricane. And we generated so much good coverage from Hurricane Irma. We'll take advantage of that. We've been very fortunate, as has the port and the airport. A point to clarify is when we talk about funding, the transportation entities in Hillsborough County have been successful with a work plan, not with just flat-out allocation. So we're going to target that conversation. We'll keep it going. And again, we are on the MPO list to do either a new building or a renovation. So we've already hit the hard part, and we can go ahead. We also talked about using out-year programming from MPO funds. The $4 million we would normally use, or a couple million for bus replacement. Since we've contracted the fleet so much this year, that gives us some flexibility in the future, and we can reprogram that money into the facility as well.
So we would look for this to be, it sounds like, totally funded through state and federal funds?
As much as we can, and of course we can put in some local funding, and I'll defer to Jeff. We have not done this, but we do have options to talk about the State Infrastructure Bank. This would be an opportunity for us if we knew money was going to be there X years from now, like if something was in the MPO TIP in 2023, for instance, we could convene a project through the State Infrastructure Bank, very low interest rates, up to 10-year repayment, not have to make a payment the first year, and then by the time a payment is due, out-year funding is available. And so we'll look at that as well. Because, again, it's not just replacing this facility, it's the efficiencies that we're losing every year by not being there can pay for the facility itself. And I don't know if Jeff has anything he wants to add on.
Good morning again. Jeff Seward, Chief Financial Officer. We are going to try to leverage as much state and federal funding as we can for the project. However, the need won't change. We're going to move forward with or without federal and state funding. It's just a matter of exactly how we want to structure that type of short-term borrowing that we may have to do. We as an agency have not done it, at least during the time that I have been here. But if we can keep the amount that we have to do, we have to come up with at the local level under $5 or $6 million, we can go out on the commercial paper market. We can do some short-term financing. And we have the ability to structure something like that over 5 years, as long as we leverage the federal dollars that we have. So we're going to move forward. It's just a matter of continuously pursuing those funding options. But we will get to a point where we have to do something to move the project forward. But again, based on the timeline, we have ample time to make those requests, particularly with the session coming up. And hopefully, and as Ms. Egan said, we can really leverage a lot of the discussions with Irma. That building obviously would have not withstood a direct hit. And there are opportunities out there to pursue funding based on your FEMA reimbursements and the structure that you have to ask for more federal dollars. So we're going to shake the tree vigorously.
Great. I really am, the federal funding, the state funding, but also I know the State Infrastructure Bank, I guess they have like a 1% interest loan, which is great. But
Right.
I mean, I also think on a project like this, if the need is there, I'll save the need for whenever, but that would also be we could look at a county or think about a county contribution to that if the others don't cover that. I think that's important to look at all our possible sources.
Mr. McLean.
And Jeff, just keep in mind, we've been doing some budget drills over the course of the last 6 months or so, if you remember. So this would have to be factored into those budget drills because this is a new item. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. McKay?
Yeah, I see at the conclusion of the to-do list, you've got negotiate, design, build contract. Has a decision been made to do it design, build, as opposed to hiring a designer and then a contractor? I understand today's world, the design build is usually more economical, but there are some drawbacks to the design build approach, and I just didn't know how far into that discussion or debate about which is the best way to go.
Yeah, we did look at conventional design bid build, but when we went on the street with our 30%, and we were able to successfully get a proposal from Bandus Wendell for the design build, since it's kind of it's a variance from where we were, we would still benefit from the design build because Wendell would be our partner as far as their proposal and what's acceptable. Their first stage of action is to go out and do interviews with our staff. What do we need? Where do we need it? Where's the circulation study? And when I say negotiate, I meant negotiate that final price with Bandus because of the fact that that's part of the same team. So,
can I follow with that?
Sure.
So the actual design builder is already been selected then for this. Is that right?
They have been selected, but we have not come to the board with a final number.
Okay. Well, I guess I would just then direct a comment to our legal counsel that the one drawback in design build contracts is sometimes the agency loses some control over critical elements, and I would just ask that you keep that in mind as you negotiate the terms of the contract itself. I know the DOT has experienced some problems with design build contracts where contractor is directed to save money, and they save money on and make decisions that are not necessarily compatible with what the agency wants. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to try and build in some measure of control in those contracts. You know.
Anyone else?
Yeah, no.
Oh, thank you, Mr. McKay. And if I may kind of play off that, I have kind of a list of a couple of comments / questions. And I'll lead off on your caution, if you will. Control, and then also, this project, it's been made clear through the presentation, is not a greenfield project. There's some existing issues, lead, asbestos, flooding, ADA. I mean, these are serious issues. So I definitely would agree. I'm going to make. I know this is just an update, but definitely look forward to those topics. Staying in the dialogue and have a couple of others. Go ahead, Jeff. Did you?
In the future, in the next month or so, as we come back to specifically this committee, we're going to start adding a CIP update component to our monthly financial discussions. So it isn't just coming back for contract signings and agreements. It's keeping the committee and the board abreast of where that money is being spent on our CIPs. Typically, we focus on the operating side. We have, again, some larger CIPs, such as this building that will be upcoming, and we'll start adding that to the update for you.
Thank you. And if I may, just to close out my comments on future updates, it's great to hear that we're talking to a transit expert as far as design, and I think I would just encourage mutability with the design. That I know there are certain hard elements that have to be engineered in, but as much as we can account for in the design, as Commissioner Kemp pointed out, different vehicle types and things like that. I think that would be great. A couple of other things. Just one quick suggestion. It might be helpful to add in future updates, just nothing expensive, but just either recycle one of the old aerials from the flooding presentations, but maybe do like an aerial overview showing existing, proposed, once there's more clarity on where things will be going. I know with big, yellow rectangles, obvious graphics. And then I think, regarding future preparedness, I think that was a great point. I definitely would look forward to updates on. And I love the idea of making it very clear, that Irma happened. We were spared, and if we hadn't, we have the opportunity to address this now so that we're not caught later with an issue. And I think, and then again, I think also just want to encourage. I know there were some questions on layout and design and other some other design related or planning related questions to be answered, but given the existing building isn't being wholly removed, I definitely would encourage updates on how the existing facility the issues like lead and asbestos and flooding and ADA will be addressed. Given that part of the remaining building will still be there. So.
And if I may, when we talk about the recycling some of the building, we have had federal investment in the current facility, primarily due to CNG, our lighting, and we will make it very clear that a lot of that material needs to be taken out and recycled, at least within a HART facility, perhaps not the new facility, but reuse that federal investment that's already been done. And it wouldn't be a HART project if it wasn't going to be totally sustainable. So we're looking at LEED certification, and we're looking at making sure that the building fits our sustainability profile and model, as well as the ability for future investment in alternate fuel vehicles, whatever the future may hold. It's now CNG, electric, who knows 10 years from now, but the building is going to be around for 40 years, so we have to be able to ensure that we don't have to keep putting money into it every time a new type of alternative fuel. Have it ready and adaptable. So
great. Thank you. All right. Thank you both. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. Oh. And on deck is Mr. Seward. Let's see.
Good morning.
For the Transportation Infrastructure Program item.
During our budget process, there were numerous questions from committee and board members on our shelter program, coupled with the work in Mission Max, where we discussed the fact that we were going to be adding shelters to new locations, closing or rehabbing and pulling some shelters down. We promised the board that we would come back and give an update of not only the impact of Mission Max on our shelter program, but what is HART shelter program? What is our current programming for shelter types? Who's responsible for the maintenance? What is our plan in the near and far term? And with that, the project manager of our bus transit infrastructure, BTI, our shelter program, is Daniel Rodriguez, and he will present this information to you this morning. Dan?
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
What a tough act to follow. Wow. All right. I'm going to do the best I can here. Okay, I'm going to go over the shelter program that we have. And just to be clear, the shelter program here is part of the VTI program. So pretty much, when we do ADA enhancements, we evaluate the location to see if it's a suitable place to place a shelter, whether we have enough right-of-way, enough ridership, and so on.
Dan, what does BTI mean?
BTI means Basic Transit Infrastructure.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we're going to go over what the other similar agencies do. I mean, I get a lot of questions on, we don't have enough shelters, we don't have this, but compared to other agencies our size, I'll have some numbers to show you. I'll tell you about our commitment, how our shelters go over time, partnerships that we have, leveraging the funding that we have, and various shelter types. So when you drive around, you'll know what you're looking at and what it is, okay? And our ways ahead. So similar agencies, okay? I go to a couple of meetings every once in a while. I run into some other folks and I ask, how their stop to shelter ratios look. So I reached out to a couple of ones, Charlotte being similar in our size. They have about 3,300 bus stops. They have only 310 shelters, so they have like a 10% coverage. I reached out to Texas, out in Fort Worth. They have less stops than us. They're 1974. They have 76 shelters. They only have 4% of the coverage. Pinellas, our sister agency across the bay, they have some more stops than we do. They have some stops closer together. They have 4822 and they have 650, so they have about 14% coverage. And I'm happy to say here at HART, we have 3,200 stops pre-Mission Max before we had our consolidation. We had over 792 shelters, so you're talking about a 1 in 4 shelter. I mean, that's high.
And when we've done the math, committee members, we look at the average boardings and alightings by stop. Since we place our shelters at our most heavily used stops, and again, places where we have right-of-way, so on and so forth, by our math, over 50% of our boardings are happening at a shelter, so we might only have a shelter at 1 out of every 4 stops, but since we're heavily used, over half our folks are boarding at a shelter, and we think that's significant to capture as well.
Absolutely.
Good job, Dan.
Okay. Our commitment. Okay, we have a commitment, obviously, to meet the ADA, right? A lot of stops were, especially the older stops in more rural parts of the county, they've been out there forever, probably even pre-ADA. So our key is to get them ADA, put them in good locations where pedestrians can get on and off. We also participate with developers and other agencies. I deal with the DOT all the time. Anytime they do any road resurfacing, road widening, sidewalk projects, I make sure that, we can leverage as much of those federal dollars and state dollars to try to get, pads for shelters and bus space. We're responsive to public input. The public would like to see as many shelters as possible. Unfortunately, due to funding, I can't put them everywhere. And sometimes you get a request where the ridership is not that high. So what I'll do is I'll reach out to either our Signal Outdoor, which is our advertising shelter company, and it might be in their interest to put a shelter at that location. We're very responsive, so that's part of the responsibility to the public input. We do improvements on a priority basis. I try to list them, in ridership per route, and then depending on the funding, because some funding is limited to certain areas of the city or the county.
And Dan, before we go on, and not just because Commissioner White is here, the fact that Signal Outdoor likes the advertising dollars means we have a really strong footprint in the Brandon area that does not match up with ridership. If we
Absolutely.
did ridership only, you wouldn't have a shelter past the
Correct.
Because
That's
there's a lot of
correct.
really expensive eyes driving around in Brandon. We're able to get shelters out there in a way that we just couldn't do if we did it by ourselves.
Absolutely. And in those areas, we were able to leverage to get bus bays and stuff like that we normally wouldn't put at the front because the ridership wasn't there. But once you build it, to me, they will come. They will have more better place to sit, more access, easier for the bus to get off the road and pick people up. Here's just a little graph on our shelters since 2004 to today. As you can see, the blue is all the installs that we did on a year basis. It's kind of low until we got to about 2009 and 10. There's two main reasons why that happened. One was we allocated some ARA funding, so we had an influx of cash to get a lot of the needs going. So that priority list got hit hard and fast. So we put out over 100 shelters that year. The following year, also was the contract we had with Signal Outdoor. And they had a commitment to put 200 shelters out in their first 2 to 3 years. And that's why you got 100 shelters placed in. In 13, there's another little jump up there as well. About 100 shelters was the shelters that I placed, as well as the shelters that got placed with the Metro Rapid. So that's why you got over a little 100 there. I also wanted to just remind people that, people ask for shelters. It's just not a shelter. It's, we got to build a pad. We got to build a landing area. You got to build sidewalk connectivity. You got to think about the ADA access. Where are they going? How are we going to get them there? There's some kind of destination nearby. So, it's bus pads, bus bays, tie-ins. It's not just the price of the shelter. I'll go over what the prices are just so we can have an idea. But it's encompasses a lot. Okay, here's what I kind of spoke before with the partnerships with DOT, with the county. The county does some sidewalk projects and intersection improvements. We always partner with them. They come to us, ask us what improvements we're looking for, if there's something that we want out of it. The partnership is it's what made this program move forward. City of Tampa also, we have some roadway and sidewalk projects. There's an upcoming project on 34th Street. I guess they're doing some roundabouts and things like that. We've incorporated our needs into there to get the bus stop similar to what they did on 40th Street. So we're working on that. Funding sources. Funding sources are, I use a federal grant, a 1% formula grant. My impact fee funds I get from the city and the county. They're specific to each location, so they're sometimes a little tight to use because you can only spend them in those zones. But we use that to leverage the federal dollar and some ad valorem funds here and there. A lot of the work I get in developing areas like Hyde Park, Brandon, is developers. Developers have either needs with parking, or they have, because of their size, they have some requirement to try to incorporate transit. So we get a lot of shelters, we get a lot of improvements, bus bays from developers. So it's been a really successful program.
Quick question.
Sure.
On that note, well, never mind. I'll talk about it later.
All right.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem. Okay, I just want to go over some of the types that we have. Here's our slimline. It's the most common. I use it in a lot of the urban corridors because it's very slim profile. It doesn't block views. You got stops near intersections. You don't want to block visibility for cars making turns. So here's one in East Tampa. It's a standard green color. We also have one in Seminole Heights. Yes, it's Seminole Heights right on Hillsborough. City requested that because it is in a historical district, that it be black. And that's very easily done. Change the color of the code when you order it. So it's no additional cost for a different color. Like I said here, they're type right-of-way situations, small footprint. They cost about $7,500. That includes the shelter, the bench, the trash, the solar panel, and the installation. So this is solely the shelter, not the design, not the construction, to place it, just the installation of the shelter alone. And we have about a little over 250 of those. The Palladium, I use it in areas that we have a lot more right away. It takes up a lot more space. It has to be in an area where it won't block the view of other folks. It gives it a lot better protection from the rain. This is what people are looking for. It's a lot more glass. There is an optional glass that goes in the front that would actually go right in front of that bench. So you can actually get really, really good protection. But for what I hear, it gets a little warm. So we haven't been putting them on. And depends, where the rain's directional rain. If we're getting a lot of rain coming in from the front and we get complaints that, hey, I'm still getting wet, then we'll go ahead and put that glass in. We have about 70 of those throughout the system. We have this oversized. I use this. It's a Palladium. It's just got an extra section in it. It's a larger roof. It has a lot of seating options. You can put the seating in almost just any way you can. And this happens to be at the Mango Walmart. This was done on an easement in their parking lot. We had a very bad bus stop. It was near a tree. It was an ADA. They partnered with us to give us a nice flat area to put it in, nice circulation through their property. And we were able to do this nice improvement at the end of the line.
Just a quick point, Dan.
Sure.
I did notice solar panels on a couple of those shelters, by the way, Commissioner Kemp. So
all our shelters are solar powered.
What do they power? They power lights?
They're power lights, LED lights, yes.
Yeah, I think in the future too, maybe fans.
Fans?
Yeah.
I've heard they want air conditioning too, but I'm going to try to do what we can.
Fans would be a simple-
Wi-Fi and USB
Wi-Fi,
ports.
Whatever we can get out of those panels and put into batteries, it's the batteries that is the issue, is the driving.
No, I know.
Yeah.
But it's pretty low energy to do a fan.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quick question. Generally, with the batteries and the size of the panels that we're able to put on, does it adequately power the shelters from a light standpoint, or do they kind of dim out at 4 a.m, or are they?
It depends. There's a lot of issues. We've used various manufacturers. The batteries can hold out the whole night, but in the wintertime now when we have the longer evenings, so right. What we do sometimes when we order them, we have them to set, so we can set them from dusk to about when service ends, because what happens is they start to dim when they start to get a certain time, and you don't get enough brightness. Right. So we're still playing with that. It depends on the manufacturer, and it's always the batteries. So and then they don't last as long. Sometimes the batteries only last 2 or 3 years. So it's as they change, we try to evolve with them.
Elon Musk is working on that.
Okay, next one I got is here's our shelter advertising. They're similar to our Slimline. They call them V boxes because of the shape of the advertising. The agreement we have with Signal Outdoor, they provide it's turnkey. They provide the concrete, they put the permitting in, they put the shelter in, they buy the shelter, they maintain it. As part of their contract, also, is they took some of our existing Slimlines, the shelter I showed you before, and they'll replace one of the panels and put an ad panel in it. And from the moment they do that, now they maintain that shelter. As well as maintaining that shelter, they also kick back some revenue to us. So, I get other agencies calling for that type of contract because they see what we do and they're very happy about that.
And by kickback, it was the last year of full reporting was $379,000. So it's about 300 shelters that we have to do nothing to get and money coming in. It's probably our first example of a P3 and one we're very proud of.
Absolutely.
We'll just use the total revenue. Yeah.
We like that.
What percentage of the revenue do we typically get back?
It is, Steve Rosenstock can get us the exact answer, but it's like 300.
I looked it up. By the contract, it's 21.5%, or 300 per shelter, as Ms. Egan stated.
Whichever is higher.
Correct.
So clearly we're getting about.
We were higher the last year. It was a nice.
$1,100 to $1,200 per shelter, so we're exceeding the minimum 300 by about
absolutely
a factor of 4.
So, just a quick question. So, the contract structure that you've developed is sought after by other agencies?
Absolutely. I get calls all the time.
That's great.
All the time.
Outstanding.
Yep.
Good job.
Yes, sir. Okay. Look ahead. Okay, now with Mission Max happening, we had some route changes. Obviously, there were some, out of 800 bus stops that were moved or changed or pulled out, there are some shelters out there. We came up with a number that we have about 160 shelters that were affected. Okay? After those 160 shelters, we found out which ones were ours and which ones had Signal Outdoor. Signal Outdoor is a concern because they do have contracts for some of these shelters. So what we started to look at, and let me go down a couple of the bullets here. Out of the 160, 81 are our shelters. HART maintains them. 33 of them we found that were shelters that we were looking to replace anyway because of their age. There's too much maintenance. They're rusting out. It's just not worth it anymore. We needed to buy new shelters anyway. Now we don't. So those 33 will go away. They'll be scrapped and disposed. 79 affect Signal Outdoor, whether they be, in this case, there's 48 of them that are the V-Box, so it's their shelter, they placed it, and some retrofitted ones they did for us. My conversations with Signal Outdoor and the maintenance team is to say, hey, we have still over 600 shelters in the system. We have shelters that need to still be replaced. Even the active ones need to be replaced. We identified 67 of them. 67 of them need to be changed out. Either they need a new shelter or they need, to be completely renovated. And so out of those 67, we're going to assign, we've already got a priority list of 24 that are going to go to Signal to put their shelters that are no longer at a bus stop to these locations. So we already started the process. We're starting to switch them out. After that, we're going to identify places on the existing either new routes or routes that we have already to try to see if we can put some shelters out at those locations. Right now, it is a systematic approach. It's this contract ends in a month. This one ends in 3 months. So we're aligning all the shelters to where they belong on the list. It's still being finalized, but we are starting the process with ones that we automatically know we have to take out. And I think that's pretty much it I got. Yes, I do. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
All right.
Any questions? Commissioner King?
Thank you. I don't know how it works exactly. I know you have the priorities, and this is great presentation, by the way. Thank you for doing this and explaining this. But I just look at when I drive along major routes that I know are our busiest routes, and I'm sure you've heard about some of the complaints that we had during when we were looking at the budgets and the cuts or the changes, Mission Max, about the bus shelters. And I particularly, I guess, think about Hillsborough Avenue, since I drive that frequently, and I know that that's one of our busiest routes. And I wasn't focused on this much because I knew we already had many things on our plate. And I'm impressed to see the percentage of places that we have shelters. But I know that is, and I was waiting too to see where our stops might end up. I knew we were looking at changing some of our stops, but I'm still concerned, and I know that was one of the complaints, especially in the town and country area of Hillsborough Avenue. And I know there's constraints right away. There's these issues, but I'm still concerned about some of those places where we have our heaviest ridership and how that rates priority wise, and where that's going to be in terms of looking at shelters in some of those areas.
Town and Country is an area that I'm really looking forward to putting more shelters in, especially on Hillsborough. When you get west of the veterans, there are some pads that were built by the DOT many years ago. Some of them are not suitable for shelter placement. They're not ADA. They got some slope to them. So we're going to have to tear them out and redo them. But there's plenty of opportunities on Hillsborough Avenue. There is quite a bit of right-of-way in that area. It's when you get east of the veterans, east of Dale Mabry, it starts to tighten up. But that looks like an area we're definitely going to put some shelters, either ourselves or Signal Outdoor.
Well, that's good. Oh, sorry, Commissioner.
Oh, no.
I was just going to say that's good news that from a right-of-way standpoint.
Yeah, there's some areas. I mean,
right.
I get a lot of requests for areas like in East Tampa on MLK. There's a lot of great ridership on MLK. It's just there's no right-of-way there. I mean, I have the sidewalk. If it's a 4 to 5 foot sidewalk with maybe a 1 or 2 foot utility, it's not enough. I can't do it. And easements are hard to come by.
Order of magnitude. How does the need for right of way affect the cost of a bus shelter location? Just on, can you put a number on it on average? Does it double the cost? Is it?
Since I've been here, we have not, other than Metro Rapid, we have not paid for any right of way for a bus shelter.
And that's probably because it's cost prohibitive.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So we're probably talking orders and orders of magnitude higher.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And it's also, we're clearly not going to do eminent domain.
Right.
I mean, for a shelter. Right. So we'll refer you back, for board members who've been on the board for a few years, you will have heard a lot of complaints on 22nd at Hillsborough, the turn when our buses are coming from Hillsborough and they turn to go south on 22nd. We had a shelter that was right at the intersection close to, I want to say the McDonald's. Is it McDonald's?
Walgreens, yes, correct.
Walgreens. And we had right-of-way there, but there were 200 people a day using that shelter to get on the bus. You imagine another 200 alighting at that location, just a lot of activity back and forth. And we would back up the intersections, and we got a lot of complaints from folks. Directly to the south, the next piece of property had enough space, but we needed to get like a 6-inch easement. It was so small. It was almost insignificant. And the property owner would not talk for less than 6 figures. He wanted $100,000. And we ultimately were able to strike a deal the next parcel down. But for years, the conversation was, yeah, you can have a shelter. Where's my $100,000 check? And even in Metro Rapid, the majority of the amount of money we spent was on real estate and to get the shelters in there. So unless you're swimming in it every day, you don't see the magnitude and that people realistically for a foot sometimes are very, very nice and sign an easement over because they understand the value of having that traffic there, and then you have the guy next door to the Walgreens, so just as an example.
And is FDOT, I mean, on a lot of these are state roads, I mean, something like a 22nd, I don't know, that's a city.
FDOT did help us on that one. They able to get creative with a bus bay design to make it work, to minimize the impact on the property owner. But FDOT's policy is not, it's up to us to get the easement. It's not their policy to do so.
Because I just think that should be something, especially with our high pedestrian bicycle crashes here, deaths, fatalities, and the issues that we have with our road design, that should be something that I know FDOT has a full plate, but that might be one of the things that we can really start to look at. I was also interested in the impact fee and mobility fee, or impact fee funding of some of this, both by the city and county, and just both of them within the last 5 years. I know you had mentioned that, but have passed instead of impact fees, mobility fees,
right.
And have to look for, or should be, I think, looking for part of that to go to mobility, and because it's a operations is not something that they would typically fund from a mobility fee. I mean, this just seems like a very important that we might be stepping up the funding in terms of mobility fee percents for this kind of infrastructure.
Have you seen an increase since the city of Tampa adopted a mobility fee probably like 2 years ago? The county adopted a mobility fee about a year ago. Have you seen an increase in funding for bus stops and or any other transit projects?
I've seen it in the local impact fee funding, because it is mobility fee now. I do see the numbers start creeping up. I think it's still a little early with the construction booming going on now. I think in a couple of years we'll start seeing some more. Though the numbers are kind of conservative in the report, I'm hopeful that that'll be higher, because what happens is usually the places that are built up is where our core is. It's where our need is the most. Of course, the dollars aren't there. Somewhere out in the county fees, in Brandon, where the service isn't as optimal as it is down in the core, there's a lot more funding to spend. So it's a juggling act. It's tough.
I just hope we can get, I guess, I don't know what the process is, but just more of a culture of funding these things, especially as a lot of development is moving into the core urban area. And now that we have mobility fees to think about, that I don't know what it is, the barriers to making that happen, but I hope we can start to do that.
Yeah.
If I may, the question I was going to bring up earlier was, when I think of the county and I think about, it's encouraging to hear that we're taking advantage of the traffic on 60 in Brandon. Is that fair to say? Literally, and those are people just in cars, not even. Am I correct, Dan? I mean, what you're doing, with Signal, we're taking advantage of the fact that there's a lot of traffic on 60, and Signal wants to pay.
Exactly.
We'll invest in that advertising.
They love 60. They love it.
So my question was related to Commissioner Kemp, and maybe this is something that can be kind of taken back to the county seat, but South County is where all the development's happening. It's blowing up. Mm-hmm. And I guess my question earlier, Dan, not to put you on the spot, but how have things been going with that? And you don't have to. We can if you need to look at data or whatnot. But I'm just curious, from a developer opportunity standpoint.
Development's been going great. I mean, 60 of all places. When we start getting east of Providence, Kings, start getting east of there, start getting towards Dover. Tons of right-of-way. Problem is, it's very rural design, and you have a lot of, swales and inlets. I mean, and it gets very expensive. Now it gets cost prohibitive for Signal to invest that much because they won't get the return.
Cars going at a higher speed, they're not going to be stopping to see a panel.
Correct.
Right.
So as now DOT is doing a job along that segment, and they're going to put sidewalk in areas that don't have sidewalks. So now you're going to start slowing things down, and with that sidewalk and those shelter pads that are already built. Now Signal's more sure if the pad and all the infrastructure is built, I'll gladly put a shelter out there at our cost and start retaining some revenue on that.
Is South County starting to look more attractive to them? I know
South County hasn't moved forward as much as I would like it to. I mean, there's some same issues at 60. A lot of right of way, a lot of swales, a lot of drainage. It's very expensive to do work there, especially from my point where the ridership is low.
Right.
So Signal is just not there yet because the cost is so high.
Right.
So if we can get some cooperative help from developers or from the county or the state to do some cooperative things, we can get it done.
That's my wink to our county.
There you go.
And, well, just to remind everybody, one of the routes that I pushed for more frequent funding, as infrequent as it is Route 60 to go from an hour to a half hour. I thought that was important. So,
Absolutely.
Maybe we'll get more ridership there. I hope so. That was the idea. So
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I would like. Well, I'm interested to see how the development community is approaching this opportunity.
Right.
I'll just put it in South County specifically, because
Right.
that's just hot. So,
Right. No, I know.
Yeah.
It's
Thank you.
filling up rapidly.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? Thank you, Dan. Great presentation.
Thank you.
And
All right.
great information. Okay. Well, we are on to our committee action items. First, we have agenda item 2A. And I believe Kenyatta Lee is here. Good morning.
Kenyatta Lee, Chief Administrative Officer. Item 2A is to authorize the Chief Executive Officer to award a contract for third-party administration services for risk management, workers' comp claim handling to commercial risk management, in an amount not to exceed $274,010. We went through a competitive bid for this process. We did an RFP. We had 5 respondents, and commercial risk was the incumbent vendor, but they won successfully through the bid process. So they're seeking a reward for that.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions on this agenda item? Okay. Do we have a motion to approve? Okay. A second?
I'll move. Approve.
Okay, and a second. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, the ayes carry. The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kenyatta. All right, agenda item 2B. Or not. No, it's 2B. We have David, Mr. Smith.
That was good. This is very straightforward. You've heard about it before at the board meeting. This is a change to our policy with respect to public comment. It is in your background. The changes are very straightforward. In paragraph 3, it's 210.3E, we strike the words "and their actual address," so people will provide their name but not their actual address. And there's additional change in paragraph 4C. We strike the words "and actual address." So essentially that's it. So it is incorporating the change that was discussed at the board.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Any questions?
So moved.
All right. Second. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any nays? Okay, the ayes carry. The motion is approved. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Now we have agenda item 2C, and Mr. Seward is back.
It is with great pleasure that staff is recommending approval of an interlocal agreement for the Regional Interjurisdictional Mobility Project, Flamingo Project, with HART in Pasco County. Pasco County is the last county that we needed to bring into the fold with interlocals. We have interlocals with Sarasota County, Pinellas County, Pasco now, and Hernando. So originally we were to include Citrus and Manatee. They have chosen not to participate in this program, but we now can move forward with a true regional interjurisdictional Flamingo fare system with Pasco on board. The install for Pasco will be occurring, actually has occurred. Lucian Campello, the PMO director, has taken the reins of this himself. The installs for that equipment, I believe, were over the weekend a couple of weeks ago. Working with PSTAs was obviously the easiest interlocal. We worked hand in hand through the process of securing this contract within it. But the interlocals with the governmental county entities obviously took a little bit more time, a little bit back and forth. But we are very, very pleased to to be the first multi-agency, interlocally driven contract for fare cards in the state of Florida. So very pleased to bring this to you, and we will be bringing a Flamingo update within the next month as well to this committee on exactly where we are. Now that this is interlocal, we can move forward with installs throughout the region, start doing some testing, and come back to you with a full implementation timeline, hopefully before Christmas.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Great presentation. Any questions? Okay.
So moved.
Second moved. I know we have some new board members, and there's a lot of history there. And I think the great pleasure comment pretty much explains a lot of the background. There's been a lot of thank you to staff for a lot of great work.
Sure.
And so appreciate it. All right. So we have a motion? Second? All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any nays? Okay, the ayes carry. All right. And the last item on our agenda is a discussion item by Mr. Seward.
Good morning.
Good morning. Our monthly update.
You will not find a financial packet or financials in your packet. And the reason at September's and October's financial reports, we hold and do a consolidated in the December timeframe based on the fact that September is at the end of the year and will be part of the CAFRA presentation in the spring. But we have reported to you where our financial balance is. And October's the first month of the year. Can't really gauge a whole lot from that. However, we will be bringing it back to you at the December meeting with a change of the format. We are going to track mission max savings. We had talked about at the very beginning with the committee and the board an expected savings over the year. And what we want to do is to be able to track that within our financial reports as well. Not embedded in the report because it's not an accounting issue, but we want to keep the board abreast of where we are and where we think we should be throughout the year as well. So with that, next month you'll see a revised format, discussions on where we are with. A plan is to be able to bring back the financial policies. I made a comment about that at the last committee meeting. Each year we review the financial policies per our own internal review policy. But there are a myriad of those policies that we want to bring forward and make modifications to. And the first batch of those will be coming to the board in December for review and consideration. So with that concludes the financial discussion.
Okay. Any questions? Well, with that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.